Hello everyone, in this video we'll take a look at the Kali Linux operating system. It is an alternative to the widely known Windows and Mac OS and is well known in cybersecurity for ethical hacking. However, it is increasingly being used in different areas such as vulnerability assessment and for penetration testing. And as a beginner, you probably want to use Kali Linux to add some context to the concepts you probably will learn. One of such concepts you probably will encounter in cybersecurity might be the cyber kill chain, which is a framework which seeks to establish how a cyber attack might happen. And we have different phases of the cyber kill chain. The attacker might start by gathering information about a system or a network in what is called reconnaissance, and may go ahead to weaponize a software, deliver it on a target machine or network, exploit a vulnerability, install command and control, and achieve actions on objectives. And with Kali Linux, we have tools pre-installed on this operating system, which helps to perform all these functions and add some context to these concepts. So in Kali Linux, you probably will have different tools grouped together, which might help you achieve these different stages of the cyber kill chain. So we have tools for information gathering, some for vulnerability assessment, and others for web application analysis, some for database assessments, password attacks, wireless attacks, reverse engineering, and a host of others. And some of the widely used tools may include Nmap, Wireshark, Aircrack NG. And with some of these tools, you get to understand why you probably should stay hidden on the internet and use a VPN, because using a tool like Nmap, you can easily gather so much information about a system and a network just by knowing the IP address. In this video, we'll look at how to install Kali as a virtual machine and create a simple penetration testing lab where you can use some of these tools against other virtual machines in a secured environment. We'll look at how to set up Kali, create a new password and user account, update the system, and configure the network settings. So let's get started by looking at how to download Kali. Okay, so to download Kali, the first thing you have to do is to locate the website, which is kali.org. And on this website, you see a download button along with its documentation. So let's click on the download button. And in here, we have some options to download the installer image, the ISO file, or to download a pre-built virtual machine. And so we'll be downloading the pre-built virtual machine. It's easier and it's straightforward. So let's click on the virtual machine. And in here, we have the setup depending on the hypervisor you are using. In our case, we'll be installing it on VirtualBox. So let's click on the second one, and it should download the installer package, which is 2.79 gigabytes. So once you have downloaded the Kali setup, the next thing to do is to locate where you downloaded the file to. So locate the downloaded file, and you should have an archive file like this. So in here, there should be two files when you double click on it. And so let's go into the folder and see how it looks. So it's a zipped file containing two here. What we want to do is we want to extract the file. And so right click on it, and depending on the extractor you have, you can just choose to extract here or extract to a folder. So let's extract it to a folder. So once you have extracted the archive file, you should have a folder like this. And if you double click and you check the folder, you should have two files in there, a VirtualBox machine definition and a virtual disk image. So we will be importing these two files into VirtualBox. So at this point, it's time to launch VirtualBox, and I will assume that you probably have already installed VirtualBox. However, if you're yet to install, you can simply go to virtualbox.org, and on your left, you should have downloads, and you can easily download it for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Solaris. And if you run into any difficulty, you can check my video, which I will link to the description and on the top right corner of the screen. And in here, I go through how to download and install VirtualBox and install an operating system. So it should be very useful. It's very thorough, and you can check it out if you run into any difficulty in installing VirtualBox. However, it's a very simple process, just like you would install any other program, and I believe you'd hardly run into any issues. So at this point, let's minimize the screen and let's launch VirtualBox. Okay, so in my VirtualBox, I already have some virtual machines already installed. Probably if you're installing for the first time, you wouldn't have any virtual machines, but I would want to demonstrate to you how to network Kali with other virtual machines. So I would use some of these virtual machines to demonstrate that. So let's start by adding the virtual disk image and the virtual machine. So you click on add and you navigate to where exactly you extracted the file. So once you locate the extracted file, you double click on the VirtualBox machine definition, and it should automatically import both the virtual disk image and the VirtualBox machine definition into VirtualBox. Before we launch Kali, we would want to configure the networking settings, and what we would aim to achieve is an isolated network which does not have access to internet or access to the host's PC. So we'd want to have a safe environment where we can use the tools in Kali against other virtual machines without having to worry about damaging any files on the host PC or causing any problems on our router. So what we want to do is to set an internal network on the Kali Linux and on any other virtual machines that we would want to use in this environment. So highlight Kali and go to settings and look out for network. At a network, you'd have 4 possible network adapters, but initially we would update Kali and configure it using the internet. So we'll initially have access to the internet, but subsequently we will disable the internet. So we can either set 2 interface cards, one with access to the internet and an internal network, or we can set one and toggle between access to the internet and the internal network. So let's set 2 for now and disable 1, but you can use the other option I just mentioned. So what you would want to do is to set adapter 1 to NAT. NAT and bridge adapter give you access to the internet, but NAT is widely used because it creates a virtual interface card. Bridge adapter uses a physical adapter of your host PC. So set the first one to NAT, and in the second one, set it to internal network and select a name. You can select any name you want, but once you select a name, make sure all other virtual machines have the same name. So for now, let's select Home Lab Internal and click on OK. So if you'd want to use any other virtual machine, I have a pfSense firewall. If you haven't seen my previous video on pfSense firewall, it should pop up on the right screen, on the right side of your screen, and also in the description, I would link it. So what we want to achieve is to have a DHCP server in our internal network, because one thing you should take note of is with internal networks, you don't have IPs being issued out to virtual machines unless you either create a static IP address manually. I'll show you that once we launch Kali. And the other option is to have a DHCP server. And pfSense is both a firewall and a router, which gives you a DHCP feature to issue IP addresses to other virtual machines on the internal network. So I advise you to have a pfSense firewall /router as part of your home lab setup. One thing you should do is make sure and keep in mind that all other virtual machines should also have the same um, internal network. So in pfSense, for example, you should make sure it has the same internal network. And for all other virtual machines you plan on using in this setup. So at this point, we can launch Kali. So you can double click on Kali to launch it. Okay, so once Kali launches, you should be presented with a login screen. So in here, the username by default is Kali, and the password is also Kali. So you can easily type that and click on login. So once it logs into Kali, this should be your desktop screen. And normally with the pre-installed virtual machine, it comes with full screen. Unlike if you install other virtual machines, you probably will have to add guest additions. So you can just resize it and you should have the full screen. So resize it and it should automatically give you a full screen. You can also click view and choose full screen mode to be able to enter the full screen mode. Here it's telling you that to exit the full screen mode, use the host key, which is currently the right control key, together with F. So if you switch to full screen mode like this, you can always exit by using right control and F. That is if that is your host key. So at this point, we like to configure Kali. And so we'll perform some quick updates. We'll change default passwords. We'll create a new user. And the first thing we'll do before all that is to create what we call a snapshot. So a snapshot is like what you call a restore point. So in Kali or in any virtual machine, you can create a snapshot so that if you later run into any troubles because of some configurations you may have changed, you can always return to this point in time. So we can create a first snapshot and we'll say probably Kali defaults or any description you like to give. You can even change the name and then click on OK. So it should create your first snapshot. You can see on the right side of your screen that it's taking a snapshot. And so once it's done, we can continue to make any changes to the system. So let's launch the Linux terminal, what you would call a command prompt in Windows. So in here, you'd find it here. You can also just click on the icon here and then search for terminal. You can easily find it. And so in here, we'll start by performing quick updates. So let's wait for the terminal to fully launch. Okay, so you realize it's Kali at Kali. We'll change the username very soon. But at this point, let's start by performing the quick update. So you type sudo. So sudo is like elevated rights, what do you call administrative privileges in Windows. So for some functions in Linux, you need to use sudo, like updating the package. So you type apt, which is advanced package 2, and then you type update. So you click enter and it will ask you for a password. So for elevated rights, where you use sudo, you need to enter the password. Currently, the password is Kali. So you can type that and click enter. And it should start downloading certain packages and updating Linux. Okay, so once the updates have been performed, the next thing we'll do is to change default passwords. So we realize that the default password is Kali, and in here we're going to change that. So we type passwd, and then we click enter, and it will ask us for the current password, which is Kali. So you type that and click enter, and then you can now type your new password and then click enter. It will ask you to confirm. So you type it again and then click enter, and your password has been successfully changed. The next thing we'll do is to change the password for super user. So we have a default password and then we have one for super user. So you realize that when we're updating it, it asked us for a pseudo password, if you remember up here. Yes, so they differ, but you can have the same password for both. And so we can easily change that by typing sudo again. And then this time we type passwd, and then we type root, and then we click enter. So ask us for the new password, and you can either use the same password as before, or you can set a different password for elevated rights, or what we call sudo. And then you click enter. It will ask you to confirm the new password, and then you click enter, and that has also been successfully updated. So at this point, the next thing we'll do is to create a new user. We realize that the default user is Kali. We want to create a personal account where we can easily sign in. So what we do is we type sudo again, and then a space, and then we type add user, and then we leave a space, and then we type the name that we want. So I will type Josh, and then click enter. So it will create the user, and it's asking me down here for a password. So I can type a password, and it's asking me to confirm the password, and then click enter. So it's asking me for my full name. You can just click enter if you want it to be left as default, but let me type my full name, and then click enter. It's asking for room number. You can just skip that by clicking enter. Work phone, you can skip that by clicking enter, and then click enter. It's asking to confirm whether the information is correct. So you can type Y and then click enter, and it has been created. But you realize down here that it's saying that it has been added to the group users, but not the pseudo users. So we have to add it to the pseudo user. Otherwise, you can't perform functions like change password or updates. So you have to add the new user you've created to the super user group. So you do this by typing sudo again, and then you type user mod, and then you leave a space, you type AG, and then you type sudo again, and then you type the name of the user you created. So mine is Josh, and then click enter. So it has been added to the super user group. The last thing we want to do is to create a path for this user in the terminal, what we call bash. So what we'll do here is we'll type sudo again, we type chsh, leave a space, type /s, and then we bring a slash, we type bin /bash, and then we use the user, so that's Josh, then click enter. And so at this point, we are done with the simple configuration we'll need. And let's log out from the default Kali account and then sign in with the account we just created. So you can close the terminal now. And on the right, you can log out. And here it's asking for options. So you can just choose to switch user or to log out. So let's switch user, and let's log in with the account we just created. So in here, my account is Josh, and then you enter your password, and then click on login, and it should log in to the new account you just created. Okay, so it has logged into the new account. Let's just confirm that. So let's go to the terminal and see what name appears. So you realize the difference here. This time around, it's Josh Kali. It's no more Kali, it's Josh Kali. Yes, so we have logged into the new account. There are several things you can do. You can change. I honestly don't like this wallpaper. You can right click. You can go to desktop settings. You can change the wallpaper. Okay, so now that we are done with our updates and configuration changes, we can disable access to the internet. So we'll go to machine and we'll go to settings, and we'll go to network. And in network, we'd want to disable the NAT adapter and only have the internal network. But you realize we can't uncheck this box here. And the reason is because the virtual machine is currently active. So we have two options. Either we shut down the virtual machine and go into settings and change it here, or the other option, the easier one, is to change the first network adapter to not attached. So it means it wouldn't have anything attached here. And we'll do that now, but you can decide to switch off your virtual machine and go into settings and change it. We'll only have the second network adapter running, and we can click on OK. So if you want to check your networking settings, there's a small icon here, and if you click on it, currently it's saying we have both adapters connected, but if you right click and disable the network and re-enable it, you should only have one adapter working. So let's click on the icon again, and you realize that the first adapter has been disconnected and it's offline, but the second one is active. So let's quickly right click again and go to connection information, and you realize that we have only wired connection 2 working, and currently we have an IP address. And the reason is we have a pfSense firewall/router, and it has a DHCP feature, and DHCP issues IP addresses. So your router issues IP addresses to your virtual machine, but since we've disabled NATs, we now have an internal network, which means that there's no DHCP server or router. So if you don't have a router on your network or a firewall which has a DHCP feature, you'd have to manually set an IP address, and let me show you how to do that. So let's close this, and you right click and go to edit connections, and with wired connection 2, because that's what we're using, you double click on it, and in here you go to IPv4 settings. So in IPv4 settings, you realize that currently the method is set to DHCP or automatic, and that's because we are currently running the pfSense firewall. And I should mention that if you have a pfSense firewall, it should always be active, and so that other virtual machines will also gain IP addresses once they connect to the internal network. Once you switch off pfSense firewall, you might have issues with other virtual machines gaining IP addresses. So currently we have the pfSense firewall running. This is the pfSense firewall, and it has access to the internet, and then it has a LAN interface, and that's what we are using. So all the IPs will be issued in the 192.168.1 range. And so that's what, let's go back to the Kali Linux. So in Kali Linux, let's see how we can manually set that. So let's change that to manual, and in manual, you can add an IP address. So you click on add, and you type an IP address. So let's say 192.168.1.1, and you have to add a subnet mask. And if you haven't watched my previous video on IP addressing and subnet mask, I would recommend it to you, and you probably will understand this better. So currently we'll set the subnet mask to 255.255.255.0, and if your virtual machine will go beyond its subnets, communicate with other virtual machines outside its subnets, then you can set a default gateway. These 3 are needed to have access beyond your subnets, or else you can save. So currently I would prefer to use the automatic DHCP because this makes everything easier. But if you don't want to use a pfSense firewall, you'd have to configure each virtual machine with a static IP address so that they can communicate. And one thing I would say is, to prevent running into a lot of trouble, you should have your IP addresses in a similar range and with the same subnet mask so that it can easily communicate. Otherwise, you might run into issues. But if you want to avoid all this, you can simply use a pfSense firewall. So let's click on Save. And the last thing we'd want to do is to verify that these virtual machines can actually communicate. So let's close this and let's open a terminal. And we'll be using a function called ping. So ping is used in network troubleshooting to find out if a virtual machine or any system, a PC, can communicate with another system on the network. So first, we need to know the IP address of the target system. So let's ping our router, our pfSense firewall. So let's check its IP address. So in here, its IP address is 192.168.1.1. So what we'll do is we'll go to our Kali Linux and we'll type ping and then 192.168.1.1 and click on enter. So it will start sending out packets, and with Linux you have to cancel it. So you use a combination of Control and C to end the ping. And once it ends, down there you would see that it will give you statistics whether the ping was successful or not. So it sent out 11 packets, it transmitted 11, and it received 11, meaning that there was 0% packet loss. And this simply means that the packets were able to send to the target system, meaning that a connection has been established between our Kali Linux virtual machine and our router or pfSense firewall. Let's try one more. Let's try it with one of our virtual machines on the network. So I currently have a Ubuntu virtual machine running. So let's quickly open that, and in the terminal, let's check the IP address. So in the terminal, type ifconfig, that's for the IP settings, and click on enter. And you should have an IP address. So it's 192.168.1.102. So let's go into our Kali Linux and let's try to ping that virtual machine as well. So ping, and you can also specify the number of times you want the ping instead of using the Control and C. So ping with C and then you type 4. So you'll ping it 4, you'll send 4 packets, and let's type 192.168.1.102 and click on enter. And you realize that our 4 packets have been sent, 4 have been received, 0 packet loss, meaning that this virtual machine can communicate with the Ubuntu virtual machine. And at this point, we are done. So we can shut down the virtual machine, and we can also power down the pfSense firewall and all other virtual machines. So we have come to the end of this tutorial, and in subsequent videos, we'll look at how to use some of the Kali Linux tools against other virtual machines that we have networked in this home lab. Thank you for watching.